As Christians, we all believe that in this new life we have in Christ, we've been saved from our old nature in a very real sense. But that still leaves the question, how much of our old nature still lingers and what do we do about it? Specifically, how do we interpret our own motivations as we walk in the Christian life? Let's talk about it. So hello everyone and welcome back to Grace Nerd. My name is Eric if you're new to the channel. If you enjoy conversation about the Christian life and Christian theology or commentary on culture from a Christian worldview, then make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you're new and hit that notification bell so that you know when new uploads happen. And if you enjoy this video, make sure that you go ahead and leave a like. It really helps out. Comments can also be a major boost, so if you have any thoughts as we go, make sure that you go ahead and leave them below. So about this question of Christian motivation. I remember when one of my favorite preachers was talking about this issue. He was actually at a conference answering different questions, and he ended up citing Jonathan Edwards when he compared the human heart, even the Christian human heart, to an onion.
Ogres are like onions.
They stink?
Yes. No.
It's really interesting when we become very introspective and we examine our motivations when we walk through the Christian life, something really interesting can happen. If we step out and we do something that we might consider good, like loving a brother in a really practical way, or preaching the gospel, or sharing wisdom with someone, it can often lead us to kind of want to pat ourselves on the back. Or at the very least, it causes us to want to recognize that we did a good thing. But if we are familiar with the scriptures, we know that pride can be a very dangerous thing. It's ultimately the root of most kinds of sin. So oftentimes after we've done a quote-unquote good thing, we'll want to look inward and we'll want to examine our motivations. We'll initially probably want to feel good, but then we immediately want to quash any pride that might well up as a result of that. And so then we'll do that and we'll brush those feelings of pride aside. But then if we continue in this process, a cycle might begin. We might look at the fact that we just brushed our pride aside and that we decided to take the humble path, and we might begin to feel really good about that. We begin to feel prideful about the fact that we avoided pride. But once we begin to see this dynamic happening, then we brush aside that pride again, and we thank the Lord that we recognized what was happening and that we were able to take the humble path yet again, not taking credit for our own goodness. But then what's the result of this? Well, you guessed it. We again recognize the fact that we saw potential pride and brushed it aside, and we begin to feel proud of the fact that we avoided pride over the fact that we avoided pride. Again, it's the onion of human sin and human pride that we will always find when we look into our own hearts.
Layers. Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. Onions have layers. You get it. We both have layers.
Humans are like onions, what can I say? And so, in the end, what is the solution to this very strange dilemma? Some Christians might be tempted to look at this dilemma and begin to think, well, wait a minute, there must be a bottom to this. There must be an eventual point where I really have rid myself of all pride and I can finally take pride in that. Oh, wait a second. And of course, this path will inevitably lead to, you guessed it, pride for the Christian when they think they can actually find the end to this path. But then there's another extreme where the Christian will begin to despair as they recognize the hopelessness of looking inward and looking at their own hearts to find holiness. But ultimately, neither of these paths are sufficient. Ultimately, I believe, again, it was Jonathan Edwards who looked at this dilemma and said the solution ultimately is never going to be found in continuing that path of looking inward. The only solution is to look outward. Christ saved us because we couldn't save ourselves. He saved us because ultimately the solution never was going to be to look inward. Now, yes, we need to recognize that Christ is changing us. He is working in our hearts. He is putting pure motivations in our hearts, one bit at a time. But we're never going to ultimately see that purified state by looking to find it. The only way we can draw closer and closer to purer and purer motivations is to end that process altogether and begin to look outward. Ultimately, our righteousness comes from Christ, and that's in two different ways. We are gifted his righteousness or counted his righteousness by what is called the doctrine of imputation. Christ's righteousness counts as our righteousness, and therefore our standing before God will never be determined by what is inside of us. But again, that's not to say that nothing is happening inside of us. It is. But again, we'll never see it by looking for it. The solution is ultimately always going to be to continue to look outward. It's ultimately very counterintuitive. Christ is working in us, but we don't look in us in order to see what he's doing. We look to him. We become like what we worship, and we're never going to worship ourselves. We become more like Christ by looking at Christ. And so there you have it. That's really just the simple thought that I wanted to share in this video. If you're sort of introspective like me, then maybe you've thought of this dilemma before. And so I really found this thought pretty helpful when I came across it. We don't ultimately become everything that we want to be by pursuing some more perfect version of ourselves. Again, we become like what we worship. We behold him, and we are changed from one degree of glory to another. So again, if you've enjoyed this video and you found it helpful in some measure, then again, make sure that you go ahead and leave a like. And if you haven't already, then make sure that you go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell. And if you've discovered the podcast in audio form, make sure that you go ahead and follow wherever you are. Again, my name is Eric. This is Grace Nerd, and we will see you again in the next video or the next live stream. See you then.